This story is an ironic and grim excursion into the everyday life of a medieval mathematician. There is no heroism, discovery, or recognition here. On the contrary, before you unfolds a harsh chronicle of survival and pointless labor amidst dirt, cold, hunger, and universal distrust. You will see how even the most basic knowledge becomes a reason for suspicion and gossip, while the pursuit of order turns into a source of loneliness and danger. This is a story of how science and reason are powerless in the face of the indifference and fear of the surrounding world. But before you get comfortable, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always interesting to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. We're beginning. You open your eyes to a familiar darkness, broken only by a faint, sickly shaft of morning light slicing through a crack in the wooden shutters. You have never known luxury, but today the cold feels especially cruel, biting at your fingers and toes, which you have bundled beneath a rough woolen blanket. Your only blanket. In the endless war between you and the chill of your stone walled room, you are always losing. Above you, the thatched roof drips. You have placed a bucket beneath the most persistent leak, but this morning you hear the rhythm of droplets splattering not on wood or tin, but on your own belongings. You sigh. There will be no staying dry today. There is never any staying dry. The smell hits you next. It is not the noble, fresh scent of countryside meadows described in the ballads, nor the herbal aroma of a scholar's den, but something thicker, riper, older. It is the unholy trinity of mold, rotting straw, and manure, all merged and heated by your own sour sweat. You are a mathematician, or at least you try to be, but you live not in the imagined ivory tower of later centuries, but in the squalid ground floor reality of medieval life. Your bed is a lumpy bag of straw, only slightly less fragrant than the manure pile outside your window. You take a long breath, not because you want to, but because your lungs insist upon it. The air is damp and flecked with the dust of decay. You cough, as you always do. Perhaps you are already sick. You are always at least a little sick. Your first act each morning is to listen. Listen for rats in the thatch. Listen for the first shrill shouts of the neighbors bickering, for the clang of the blacksmith's apprentice stumbling into the street, for the desperate animal noises of livestock. But most of all, you listen for the bell of the town, for that bell means the market is stirring, and you, like everyone else, are already behind schedule. You peel yourself from your straw sack, legs protesting, back aching. There are no soft slippers for you. The floor is icy stone, so rough you once tore your heel open on a protruding chip. You stand anyway, because there is no choice. The world of numbers waits, but so does the world of filth. Dressing is a delicate art. You have exactly one pair of hose, riddled with holes, mended with darker threads so many times that the original color is a memory. Your tunic is thick, patched, heavy with dust, and the subtle, persistent stench of mildew. If you are lucky, there will be no new lice today. You think, briefly, of your latest calculation, a series of ratios that occupied your dreams, twisting themselves into strange, surreal images involving dancing numbers and leering priests. You try to hold on to the thread of the proof, but it slips away as the reality of your morning tightens its grip. Mathematics, you are learning, is best practiced not in the ethereal realm of the mind, but here in the cold mud with fingers numbed and a head full of hunger. Next comes the ritual of finding your shoes. They are not by the bed. Of course not. You find one beneath the table, stiff and crusted with last week's mud, the other near the hearth, where you vaguely recall throwing it at a rat in the night. You pull them on, cursing quietly as you step in something damp. Water? Rat piss? You do not check. You reach for your only cloak, a threadbare thing more full of holes than fabric, but necessary nonetheless. Outside, you know, it will be colder still. You wrap it around yourself and shiver. No fire burns in your hearth because there is no wood. You burned the last log 3 nights ago, praying for warmth as you scribbled equations on a scrap of parchment scavenged from the market. You know better than to dream of a better life. That is not for the likes of you. Your neighbors, illiterate and suspicious, view you as a peculiar oddity, somewhere between madman and heretic. You try to keep to yourself, but the walls are thin and gossip is thick. Every strange diagram, every mumbled calculation becomes grist for the rumor mill. You remember the butcher's wife telling her friends that you had devil's marks in your room. You are too tired to care. Breakfast is not an event. It is a matter of finding something remotely edible and putting it in your mouth. You scrounge the table and discover a heel of bread, so hard you consider using it as a weapon. It is mostly mold. You scrape off the green fuzz with your thumb and chew, not tasting, only swallowing. You consider that perhaps, if you starve, your mind will finally be free to wander where it likes. But even this thought is too heavy. You open the shutter a crack and peer outside. The yard is slick with muck, churned by the passage of pigs and children and the ceaseless dripping of rain. Somewhere in the mud lies your only bucket, upended by the wind. The air smells even stronger out here, an aggressive combination of manure, rot, and smoke. You grimace and close the shutter again. In the gloom, you survey your possessions. There is your little box of writing implements, an ink pot that is nearly dry, a penknife so dull it might as well be a spoon, 2 goose-quill pens with split nibs. There is your precious, battered treatise on arithmetic, written in a hand so cramped and faded that you have memorized every page for fear it might finally crumble away. Above all, there is the silence. It is not peaceful, but hungry, the kind of silence that presses down on your shoulders, reminding you that you are alone in your peculiar pursuits. No one cares if you solve the riddle of the square root. No one will thank you if you uncover some hidden symmetry in the stars. You are a mathematician, but in this world, that is just another way of saying nuisance. You sigh, rub your eyes, and stand up straight. The day awaits, as indifferent as always. It will be a day of cold, hunger, and endless calculations interrupted by filth. You would rather go back to bed, but there is no time. You must fetch water before the line grows too long. You must sweep the manure before your landlord comes to curse you. You must, above all, survive. And perhaps, if the gods are bored enough, you will find a few moments to scribble down a new equation before darkness falls again. It is with all the excitement of a condemned man trudging to the gallows that you step outside into the bitter morning. You draw your cloak tighter, but there is no keeping the wet out. The sky is not so much gray as it is the color of dirty wool, heavy and lowering, promising rain or worse. You squint at the thin streaks of light, but nothing in this world makes the day brighter. You scan your little patch of yard for your bucket. There it is, tipped over and half sunk in a patch of mud that smells suspiciously strong, even for this place. You fish it out, your fingers immediately freezing, caked with a layer of grime. You do not remember the last time you washed this bucket, and you are keenly aware that washing buckets with the very water you are fetching is one of life's smallest but cruelest ironies. The bucket is splintered along one side, bound together by a length of knotted cord that you scavenged from an abandoned fish trap. The handle is slick with something that is probably only dirt. Still, it is yours, and it is essential. A mathematician needs water, if not for health, then at least to keep the ink flowing and the bread from choking you on the way down. You set off across the uneven yard, picking your way through patches of frost and manure. With every step, your shoes fill with cold, squelching filth. A rooster crows somewhere in the distance, followed by the cacophony of waking livestock, pigs snorting, cows lowing, dogs barking at ghosts, or nothing at all. No one pays you any mind as you make your way toward the heart of the village. That is a blessing. The less you are noticed, the better. The road to the well is little more than a track through the mud, pocked with puddles that reflect the endless gray of the sky. You pass the tanner's house and catch a whiff of something so vile that even you, accustomed as you are to every possible stench, flinch. The tanner waves a grimy hand in your direction and grins, showing a mouthful of blackened teeth. You do not wave back. At last, you reach the communal well, that ancient and much abused relic at the center of village life. The well is little more than a hole ringed with rough stones, its winch and bucket as weather-beaten as the villagers clustered nearby. There is already a line. There is always a line. The first in line is old Bertha, a woman whose back is permanently bent from decades of fetching water and not enough bread. She clutches her battered tin pail like a shield, glaring at anyone who dares come too close. Behind her, a gaggle of children poke at each other with sticks, shrieking and shoving, blissfully unaware of the importance of water or the risks it carries. There is talk of a sickness in the next village, a fever that turns the skin yellow and the eyes red, but no one has the luxury to worry about that right now. You join the queue and let your mind wander. Mathematics is an escape, though not a particularly pleasant one. You consider the ratios of those who will drink today to those who will fall ill tomorrow. You calculate the probability of surviving another year without the fever. The odds are not good, but then neither is the water. When your turn finally comes, you lower your battered bucket into the well with the winch, listening to the rope creak. You imagine, for a fleeting moment, that you are drawing up a solution, a miracle, perhaps even wisdom. Instead, the bucket comes up heavy, sloshing with cloudy water. There is a film on the surface, a faint shimmer that might be oil or worse. At the bottom, something dark and unidentifiable wriggles and disappears. You try not to think about it. You set your bucket down, watching as a thin, greenish scum clings to the rim. No one comments. Everyone knows the water is bad, but there is nothing to be done. The well is the only source, and to complain is to invite trouble, or perhaps worse, the attention of the authorities. Once, a group of villagers tried to clean the well. They succeeded in stirring up so much filth from the bottom that half the village was sick for weeks. Since then, it has been left alone to fester in peace. You heft the bucket and begin the slow, laborious walk back to your hovel. Your arms ache and your hands are numb by the time you reach your door. You set the bucket on the table and stare at it, willing the water to look cleaner, to taste fresher, to offer something other than a guarantee of cramps and fever. But it does not. It is what it is. You find your chipped earthenware mug, dip it into the bucket, and bring it to your lips. The taste is exactly as you remember, a strange blend of earth, mold, and faint rot. You swallow, and the water sits heavy in your stomach, refusing to comfort. You know what comes next, a rumbling, a cramp, and the distant fear that this time the sickness will be worse. It is no wonder that so many children die before they are old enough to count to 10. The old women say the well is cursed. The priest blames sin. You, ever the mathematician, see only the numbers. Of 10 children born, perhaps 3 will see adulthood. Of 10 adults, perhaps 1 will live to old age. You wonder how many mathematicians the well has claimed, probably more than you care to think about. Still, you persist. You pour a little of the precious water into your inkwell, praying that it will not sour the ink. You use another splash to moisten your bread, rendering it almost edible. You save the rest for the daily tasks, washing your hands, rinsing your pen, perhaps even wiping the grime from your face, though you doubt it will make much difference. Outside, the clouds gather and the wind howls, carrying with it the promise of more rain, and with it more mud, more disease, more despair. You drink another mouthful of water, feeling it slosh in your belly, and remind yourself that you are lucky. in a way. At least you have water. At least you have survived another morning. You turn your attention to your calculations, trying to lose yourself in the orderly world of numbers, where water is only a variable and disease is just another factor in the equation of life. But even here, reality intrudes. Your hands are dirty, your stomach churns, and the smell of the well clings to you like a second skin. You sigh and dip your pen in the inkwell, drawing the first line of the day. In your mind, you calculate the odds, the probability of clean water, the likelihood of illness, the certainty of disappointment. The numbers do not lie, but neither do they offer comfort. Outside, a child screams, a dog barks, and somewhere the well continues to turn, drawing up another bucket of cloudy, cursed water for the next in line. It is a strange sort of hope, the kind you feel every morning when you turn to your table in search of breakfast. Some ancient animal part of you still expects to find a miracle there, a basket of eggs, a wedge of cheese, perhaps even a slab of bacon that smells of better days. Of course, there is nothing of the kind. There never is. Instead, you find what you always find: bread, a single, lonesome heel of rye, so stale that even the rats have passed it over for the more appetizing options in your stores. The color is somewhere between gray and brown, with patches of white and green that signal the return of your perennial companion, mold. You examine the crust with all the scientific curiosity of a natural philosopher, cataloging the various spots and filaments as if they were rare gems and not the warning flags of rot. You consider scraping the mold off with the edge of your knife, but the blade is so dull it squashes rather than slices. You settle for rubbing at the bread with your thumb, flicking flecks of green to the floor and hoping that whatever grows there is less lethal than what lingers on the surface. In a moment of optimism, you try to remember the last time you ate anything that could be described as fresh. The answer, as always, escapes you. You break off a piece of bread, or rather, you wrestle it apart. The crust resists, as if reluctant to be consumed. The crumb is dense, damp, and faintly sour. You sniff it, and for a moment you wonder if it is your imagination or if the bread really does smell of last season's hay, mingled with the persistent aroma of mildew that seems to inhabit everything in your hovel. You eat it anyway, because not eating is not an option. There is no butter, of course. Butter is for feast days, weddings, and the priest. There is no honey, because the last time you saw a bee was in a midsummer dream. Cheese is a legend told by travelers, meat a myth passed down from grandparent to grandchild. Sometimes, on rare occasions, you find a shriveled apple at the bottom of a sack, or a handful of wizened beans forgotten in the larder. But this morning, as on most mornings, there is only bread. You chew slowly, working each bite for as long as you can, partly to coax some flavor out of the dry mass, partly to convince your body that you are eating more than you are. Your stomach protests, grumbling loudly enough to startle the nearest mouse. You pour a trickle of water into your mug, swirl it around, and gulp it down, hoping it will soften the bread in your belly. As you eat, your mind drifts, as it always does. Hunger is a constant companion, an itch that never quite leaves you alone. It sharpens your senses and dulls your mind in equal measure. You find yourself calculating, as always, the rations you have left, the days you can survive on what remains, the probability of securing another loaf before starvation tightens its grip. Mathematics, you realize, is a cruel mistress. She offers no comfort, only cold, hard numbers. You think of the great philosophers and mathematicians whose names you have memorized: Euclid, Pythagoras, Al-Khwarizmi, Gerbert Doriak. Did they know hunger like this? Did they, too, sit at rickety tables, gnawing on old bread, their minds filled with equal parts numbers and despair? Did they wonder, as you do, if the pursuit of truth is worth the price of a growling stomach and trembling hands? Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. The sound is sharp and mocking. You imagine the rooster, proud and fat, strutting through the muck, unaware of the fate that awaits him at Michaelmas. You try to recall when you last ate meat, but the memory is so distant it feels more like a story told by someone else. You remember the taste, or think you do, the salty richness, the satisfying weight in your belly, the way a single piece could lift your spirits for an entire day. Bread does not do that. Bread is a necessity, not a comfort. Your breakfast is silent, save for the occasional creak of the bench beneath you and the distant clamor of the village coming to life. You hear the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the shrill voices of women scolding children, the mournful lowing of cattle waiting to be led to pasture. All of it blends into a familiar morning dirge, a reminder that nothing ever really changes. You finish your meal, or what passes for a meal, and brush the crumbs from your lap. A few scraps fall to the floor, where they are immediately claimed by the more daring mice. You do not bother to chase them away. They are survivors, like you, and you almost admire their tenacity. You take a moment to contemplate your situation. You are a mathematician, or so you like to think, but your days are ruled by forces you cannot control: weather, hunger, disease, and the relentless passage of time. You try to impose order on chaos, to find patterns where none exist, to extract meaning from the indifferent world around you. But some mornings, it is all you can do to eat your bread and hope for something better. Your thoughts turn to your work. Last night, you stayed up as late as the feeble light would allow, scratching out equations by the glow of a single tallow candle. The wax is gone now, melted to a greasy puddle at the bottom of the holder. The parchment is smudged, the ink faded. Still, you feel the urge to return to your calculations, to lose yourself in the certainty of numbers. But before you can do that, there are chores to be done. The fire must be coaxed back to life, if you can find enough dry wood. The floor must be swept, the bucket scrubbed, the chamber pot emptied. You are a mathematician, but also a servant to your own survival. You stand, stretching your stiff limbs, and gather the remains of your meal. The morning light is a little stronger now, though still weak and cold. You look at the empty table and sigh, promising yourself that tomorrow will be better. It is a promise you know you cannot keep. You pick up your inkwell and quill, fingers already itching to draw lines and symbols, to chase the fleeting beauty of logic and order. But for now, you are just another hungry soul, scraping by on bread and gray thoughts, waiting for something, anything, to change. Outside, the world turns on, indifferent to your hunger and your hope, and you step into the day, clutching your calculations like a shield against the cold. There is a certain inevitability about the morning chores, a mathematical certainty so reliable that you could chart it on a graph. Wake, shiver, choke down bread, and then step outside to face the manure. You try not to resent the pattern. After all, mathematics is built on patterns. But there is a difference between the elegant geometry of a spiral and the repetitive, stinking reality of dung. You shoulder open the battered door and are immediately greeted by a wave of cold air, thick with the scent of decay and livestock. The world outside is a landscape of mud, straw, and droppings. The faint rays of sunlight, such as they are, only highlight the mess rather than dispelling it. You have always found it strange how light does nothing to cleanse filth. It only makes it more visible. The courtyard is not grand. In fact, it is barely more than a patch of trampled earth surrounded by a sagging fence. Within its bounds, you are the sole custodian of chaos. Chickens dart between piles of droppings, scratching for insects, and occasionally pecking at your toes with a malevolent intelligence. Somewhere nearby, the goat, who regards you with a kind of contempt, chews the fence with methodical slowness. Your tool for today's battle is a rake, if such a grand word can be used for a handful of broken tines lashed to a stick. The handle is slick, not with varnish, but with the accumulated oils of 100 dirty mornings. You sigh, accept your fate, and get to work. Manure is not uniform. That is a fact you have learned over the years, a principle as immutable as any in geometry. Cow dung is broad and flat, dark and stubborn, resistant to movement unless well frozen. Goat pellets are dry, rolling across the ground like errant marbles, disappearing under every board and stone. Chicken droppings are the worst. A sickly white-green paste that clings to everything it touches, including the bottom of your shoes and the hem of your tunic. You begin with the largest pile near the gate, where the cow, when she deigns to visit, always leaves her mark. The rake finds purchase, but the effort is Herculean. With every heave, your arms burn and your back aches. The cold seeps through your clothing, numbing your fingers. Steam rises from the fresher piles, a sour fog that coats your face and makes your eyes water. You do not stop because you know what happens to those who let the dung accumulate. Rats, disease, angry neighbors, and, worst of all, your landlord. You ponder, as you always do, the deeper mathematics of manure. How many piles must one remove before the yard is truly clean? Is cleanliness a limit you approach but never reach? A kind of manure asymptote? You calculate, not for the first time, the average volume of droppings produced by each animal, multiplying by the number of animals, the number of days, the number of times you wish you had chosen a different profession. The numbers are not comforting. Every so often, a neighbor passes by on the road, offering you a look that is equal parts pity and suspicion. The village is small, and everyone knows you as the one who writes numbers. Some say you are wise, others that you are mad. More than once you have overheard whispers that you dabble in alchemy or witchcraft, simply because you spend so much time with ink stained hands and furrowed brow. You want to tell them that the only magic you practice is the transmutation of dung into slightly less dung, but you keep your thoughts to yourself. The chickens, for their part, take your labor as a personal affront. They cluck indignantly, fluttering out of your way with a show of irritation. The goat, unimpressed, simply watches, her jaw working slowly. At least the pig is gone, sold last winter to pay a debt. You do not miss the pig's unique contribution to your daily labors. Eventually, you reach the far side of the yard where the fence leans dangerously over a patch of nettles. Here the ground is so churned and filthy that you simply give up, deciding that some problems are not worth solving. You dump the last load of manure onto the compost heap, a mountain of filth that steams ominously even on the coldest mornings. It is, you tell yourself, a kind of progress. You pause, leaning on your rake, and try to catch your breath. Your muscles ache, your hands are raw, and your tunic is now marked with a constellation of dark stains that will never come out. You look down at yourself and wonder if, in some future century, mathematicians will labor in pristine halls, their robes unstained by the world outside. You hope not, for their sake. There is a certain honesty in dirt. The wind shifts, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of your labor. You wrinkle your nose, but there is nothing to be done. The smell will cling to you for the rest of the day, seeping into your hair and skin, reminding you with every breath that you are a creature of earth, not of numbers. As you turn to go inside, you notice the tracks of tiny feet in the mud. Rats, always rats, drawn by the warmth of the compost and the hope of a meal. You make a mental note to check your stores again, to set the traps, to add rat management to your growing list of unsolvable equations. Inside, you strip off your outer layer and hang it by the door where it will drip and dry and never quite lose its smell. You wash your hands in a basin of icy water, scrubbing until your skin burns. The dirt comes off mostly, but the smell remains. You wonder, as you often do, if your mind is sharper for all this toil, or simply more battered. You sit at your table, breathless and chilled, and glance at your notebook. The page is stained with yesterday's efforts, a map of ink and mud and desperation. Still, you reach for your pen. The world of numbers is always waiting, pristine and indifferent, untouched by the muck outside. You scribble a few lines, ratios, estimates, the endless math of survival. You wonder if there is a formula for contentment, for making peace with a life measured in piles of manure. If there is, you have not found it yet. The door creaks, and you glance up, half expecting the landlord, half fearing a neighbor come to complain about the smell. But there is only the wind, whistling through the cracks, bringing with it another gust of cold and the promise of more chores to come. Outside, the chickens resume their search for insects. The goat returns to her fence. The compost heap steams on, oblivious to your calculations. And you, mathematician, sit in the half light, hands raw, stomach empty, head full of numbers, and the faint but undeniable aroma of manure clinging to everything you touch. Another morning's labor, another problem unsolved. You set down your pen and close your eyes, if only for a moment, and dream not of equations, but of a world where dirt and numbers do not always mix. The world of mathematics is vast, but your world, your physical, immediate world, fits inside a single room, and on your most hopeful days, inside a single tattered book. It sits on your table, the one object in the room that you truly own, in the way a man owns his own hands or his only blanket. To lose it would be like losing a limb or the last hope for something resembling meaning. Your book is not the leather bound tome that future generations might imagine scholars to possess. No, your book is a pitiful affair. The covers are wooden boards, crudely cut, covered with a patchwork of flaking vellum, stained by a lifetime of hands dirtier than your own. The binding is a lattice of string, some of it replaced by strips of goat sinew, some by your own hair, in moments of desperate ingenuity. It has survived rats, floods, mold, and the covetous eyes of those who know nothing of numbers, but know the value of fuel for a fire. You sit at your table, staring at it. For a moment, you hesitate, as though the act of opening the book might damage it further, as if mere observation could cause the text to fade. You do not turn the pages quickly. Each one must be coaxed apart with care, lest the brittle parchment split along its creased edge, sending a shower of ancient dust into the air. The text itself is a palimpsest, a manuscript written, scraped away, and overwritten multiple times by hands, both patient and impatient, careful and careless. Here and there, you can see the ghost of a Latin prayer beneath a formula or a fragment of a herbal recipe, half erased by someone who, like you, tried to stretch the usefulness of every inch of parchment. You read by habit and by memory. Even in the poor light, you can trace the lines you have traced 100 times before, the strange crabbed script of some forgotten predecessor, the numbers written in a style so outlandish that you sometimes suspect they are riddles, not calculations. Margins are crowded with annotations, most not your own, all cryptic, all tantalizing. You wonder if the original owner was any better fed or simply more skilled at hiding his hunger behind ink. This is your library, one book, patched with scraps, containing fragments of arithmetic, geometry, and a sprinkling of astrology for good measure. You know every page, every blot and stain. You have memorized whole passages for those dark nights when you must hide the book beneath a floorboard, when even a candle is too great a risk. For in this age, knowledge is not just rare, it is dangerous. You recall the whispers, how a man in a nearby village was beaten for owning a book in Greek, how another, suspected of sorcery for writing equations, vanished one night and was never seen again. In theory, your book contains only numbers, only logic, only proofs. But in the hands of the ignorant or the jealous, a proof is just a spell, a square root just a charm, a calculation just another name for a curse. So you hide your book, sometimes under the loose plank near the hearth, sometimes in the hayloft, once even in the outhouse, for fear that a nosy neighbor might stumble upon it. Every time you retrieve it, you whisper a silent apology to whatever scholar first set quill to parchment. There are not many like you left. You cannot copy it. Paper is too dear, ink nearly impossible to come by. The one attempt you made at transcribing your favorite passage was a disaster. Your writing cramped, your ink too pale, your page chewed by mice before you finished. That scrap sits now as a bookmark, more of a talisman than a backup. You shudder to think what will happen when your book is finally lost to mold, fire, or simple old age. Still, you cling to it. When the world outside presses in with hunger, cold, or the stink of manure, you open your book and retreat. You follow the labyrinthine proofs of Euclid as though you might find a way out of your own small labyrinth. You ponder the arithmetic puzzles left in the margins, sometimes solving them, sometimes inventing your own solutions when the logic eludes you. You would share the book if there were anyone to share it with. The village priest looks at you with suspicion, more interested in counting tithes than exploring the mysteries of numbers. The blacksmith's son once asked to see your book, but when you showed him a simple equation, he laughed and called you mad. The baker's daughter swore it was a charm to keep mice from the flour. You quickly hid it away, vowing never to trust anyone with your secret again. Yet you persist. When the moon is bright and the house is still, you read by what little light you can gather. You have no candle, so you open the shutter just wide enough to catch the moonbeam on your page. You squint and shiver, but the cold and the risk are worth it for a few moments with your precious book. You read the same lines again and again, numbers arranged in columns and rows, diagrams sketched in shaky hand, the occasional note from a previous owner, wrong or try again, penned in a spidery scrawl. You cannot help but argue with these ghosts, sometimes cursing their arrogance, sometimes marveling at their insight. One day, you tell yourself, you will add your own notes in a proper hand. Perhaps, if fortune smiles, you will meet another like you, and together you will build a new library, one that cannot be hidden beneath a floorboard. Until then, Your world is measured in the weight of a single fragile book. You hear a sound, a distant shout, a dog barking, the scrape of a boot outside your door. Your heart jumps. Without thinking, you snap the book shut, wrap it in cloth, and slide it into its hiding place. You sit perfectly still, breath held, listening for the telltale signs of an intruder, a neighbor, or worse, the church's men. Minutes pass. Nothing happens. It was only the wind or a stray dog looking for scraps. You breathe again, but the tension remains. Your book is safe for now. You know this cannot last forever. The book will crumble or be stolen or burned, but for now, you have it. For now, you are still a mathematician, not just a servant, not just another peasant lost to the mud and filth of everyday life. The numbers are still yours, and so you reach for your pen, for the last bit of ink, and you write, not because it will change anything, not because anyone will read it, but because it is all that stands between you and the dark. Outside, the wind howls, carrying the scent of manure and wood smoke. Inside, you sit in the half light, guardian of a single fading book, scribbling numbers into the void. You always imagined, in the earliest days of your youth, that there might be some satisfaction in passing on the knowledge of numbers. In your mind, you saw yourself as a kind of torchbearer, illuminating the dark corridors of ignorance for eager young minds, guiding them toward understanding and, if not happiness, then at least a small degree of self preservation. The reality, as with most things in your life, is far less poetic. On the rare days when your stomach is not gnawing itself and the weather is merely miserable rather than murderous, you attempt your little lessons. You sit at your table, your book well hidden, your best piece of charcoal clutched in your hand, and wait for the pupils who trickle in with all the enthusiasm of livestock heading to the slaughter. Usually there are three. Tommaso, the blacksmith's youngest, with hands already hardened by the bellows. Bert, the shepherd's boy, who always smells faintly of sheep and boredom, and Marta, the baker's daughter, who attends not for the love of learning, but to escape the endless kneading of dough and perhaps to spy on your odd habits for her mother. The classroom is your kitchen, a grand title for a cramped corner between the hearth and the only window, where the draft is constant and the smoke from last night's failed fire still lingers. The children sit on benches salvaged from discarded planks, legs swinging, fingers sticky from whatever they managed to filch for breakfast. Their faces are masks of studied indifference, their eyes already drifting toward the door. You begin, as you always do, with the basics: numbers, shapes, lines. How many loaves can be baked from a sack of flour if each loaf takes 3 cups and the sack holds 15? You ask, chalking out the problem with hope that it might for once rouse some spark of curiosity. Tommaso shrugs, not bothering to hide his yawn. My father just bakes until there's no more flour, he says. What's the point of counting? Bert, ever literal, pipes up. 5. But my da says the miller always cheats, so it's more like 4. His math is sound, but his interest evaporates immediately after the answer, as if thinking is an offense he has reluctantly committed and now must forget. Marta, lips pursed in boredom, leans back until the bench creaks. My mother says it's best not to think too hard about numbers. People who count too much end up cursed. You try to smile, but the corners of your mouth ache. Numbers are not curses, they are tools, like a plow or a hammer or a broom, Marta interrupts, glancing meaningfully at the ever present pile of dirt by the door. There are days you wonder why you bother. Still, you press on, drawing lines and shapes on a battered piece of slate. Suppose you have a field shaped like this rectangle. If you walk its length and then its width, how far have you gone? Tommaso sighs. I would not walk. I would send the dog. Bert picks at a scab on his knee. Why would I walk a field for no reason? You explain, as gently as you can, that knowing how to measure land is important for dividing property, paying taxes, avoiding disputes, or, at the very least, for not being cheated by one's neighbors. But your words fall like rain on stone. The concepts slip off their minds, leaving no mark. You pivot, desperate. What if you want to share your bread equally among friends? How do you know each gets the same? This, at least, earns a flicker of attention. Food, the one universal language. Just cut big pieces for myself and smaller for the others. Marta smirks, and the boys laugh. So much for fairness, so much for mathematics as the foundation of justice. You try a different tack, more abstract, more ambitious, more foolish. Imagine a triangle, Tommaso groans. Not the triangles again. You persist, sketching a crude shape on the slate. If you know the length of two sides and the angle between them, you can find, Bert interrupts, wide eyed with horror. Angles? My uncle said his neighbor counted angles, and now he's blind in one eye. You stifle a sigh and continue. You have learned over time that direct instruction is pointless. Arguments work no better. Sometimes, out of stubbornness or pity, they will repeat after you, reciting simple sums or copying a line or two. But it is not understanding, only mimicry. There are moments, rare and fleeting, when one of them stares at the shapes you have drawn, brow furrowed, mouth open in honest confusion. You can see the gears turning, the faintest glimmer of a question. But it fades, replaced by laughter, by a fart, by the sudden urge to chase a chicken or throw a clod of dirt at the wall. The world's concerns are more immediate than yours. Hunger, cold, and the daily grind do not leave much space for abstractions. And of course, there is always the lurking suspicion. Knowledge is dangerous, too much thinking, too many questions, and suddenly you are the subject of gossip. People mutter about what goes on in your kitchen, about strange symbols and unholy calculations. Marta's mother crosses herself when you pass by, as if mere proximity could infect her with numbers. You wish you could say you do not care, but you do. Each lesson that ends in confusion or mockery, each day when you fail to plant even the smallest seed of curiosity, weighs on you. You wonder if your own teachers ever felt so pointless, so weary, so desperate for a glimmer of connection. By midday, the lesson is over. The children scatter, some to chores, some to idleness, none to thought. You watch them go, feeling the familiar blend of relief and disappointment. Your kitchen is quiet again, the only sound the ticking of the draft through the cracks in the window and the soft scurrying of a mouse beneath the floor. You clean the slate, wipe the table, and return to your book, your only loyal pupil. Here at least, the numbers behave. Here at least, the logic is unbroken, the patterns pure. You try to lose yourself in calculations, but your mind drifts back to the morning's failures. You imagine, not for the first time, a world where knowledge is prized, where students arrive with open minds, where teaching is not a daily humiliation. But that world is not this one. This one is ruled by hunger, suspicion, and the tyranny of daily survival. Your efforts, like your lessons, fade into the cold air, ghosts of ambition, dissolving before they can take shape. You close your book, set aside your pen, and stare at the shadows gathering in the corners. The day is not half over, but already you are tired. Already you are beaten. You wonder how many more lessons you will give, how many more futile arguments you will stage before you admit what everyone else seems to know, that in this world, numbers have no power. Outside, the children shout, chickens squawk, and life continues, untroubled by your efforts. You sigh, stand, and prepare yourself for the next chore. Another problem, another equation, equally insoluble. The world outside your window is a lesson in persistence, though not the kind that leads to enlightenment. The cold is everywhere, a silent, creeping force that insinuates itself through every crack and seam of your hovel, finding your skin, your bones, your thoughts. The day might have moved from morning to noon, but the sun has not made itself known. Its pale, wan light barely distinguishes itself from the leaden sky. The village seems caught in a perpetual twilight of dampness, where the season is always too cold for comfort and too wet for work. You settle yourself at your makeshift desk, nothing more than a plank balanced on upturned crates, intent on squeezing a little order from the chaos. The ambition is noble, but the environment is hostile. Your fingers are stiff, every joint aching, as if to protest your desire for learning. Each time you attempt to flex your hand, you feel a pulse of pain, like the memory of old wounds. You look at your pen, your inkwell, and your single precious page, and for a moment you simply stare. You are not a scholar in a sunlit cloister, but a prisoner of winter and want. Slush seeps in under the threshold, the product of yesterday's snow and today's drizzle. It spreads slowly, maliciously, across the floor, bringing with it the smell of decay and the memory of every filthy boot that has passed through the village. Your feet, encased in rag wrapped shoes, are wet and numb. When you move them, you can feel water squelch between your toes. The sensation equal parts discomfort and resignation. You tell yourself that the cold is invigorating, that discomfort sharpens the mind. The reality is that it dulls everything. You try to focus. There is a calculation before you, half finished and already smeared by an earlier drop of water. You attempt to remember where you left off. Was it the sum of the angles in a pentagon, or the volume of a heap of barley? Your mind, usually sharp in spite of fatigue, is sluggish. The numbers blur. You shiver and rub your hands together, but your breath emerges as a pale ghost in the chill air, proof that your body is losing the battle against the elements. You reach for the inkwell, only to find that the ink has thickened in the cold, clinging stubbornly to the bottom of the pot. You add a drop of water, tainted, no doubt. But what choice do you have? The ink grows thin, unpredictable. Sometimes it refuses to flow. Sometimes it runs wild, soaking into the parchment in ugly, uneven blotches. Your pen, a battered quill with a tip you have carved and recarved, splits at the nib, splaying out like the feet of a splayed goose. You try to mend it with your penknife, but the blade is so dull it crushes rather than slices. The parchment itself is a battlefield. Moisture has puckered its surface, warping lines and making a mockery of any attempt at neatness. Ink pools in the valleys and skips over the ridges. Your careful diagrams, meant to show the logic and beauty of geometry, devolve into childish scrawls. You wonder, briefly, if there is any dignity in this struggle, or if you are merely flailing in the mud, pretending at wisdom while the world laughs at your efforts. You think of those fabled mathematicians who came before, those who supposedly performed miracles with nothing more than a stick and a patch of sand. But you have no sand, only mud, no sun, only cloud, no audience, only the echo of your own muttered curses. The candle stub you have hoarded for weeks is long gone. Even if you could light a fire, the wood is damp and green, more likely to smolder and smoke than to warm you. The best you can hope for is that the day will pass without your ink freezing solid, without your papers dissolving into pulp. A gust of wind rattles the window shutters, driving a fine spray of icy water through the gaps. You curse, lurch to your feet, and push a sack of straw against the threshold, hoping to staunch the tide of slush. The straw is already sodden, heavy, and it does little to halt the invasion. You can almost feel the cold climbing your legs, an army of tiny knives. In your darker moments, you suspect that the slush is sentient, that it waits for moments of distraction to creep closer, inch by inch, until it claims your table, your notes, your soul. You sit again, teeth chattering. With every breath, your lungs ache. You try to return to your calculations. The numbers are a kind of sanctuary, a shelter built from logic and abstraction. But even here, the cold seeps in, making your mind as sluggish as your hands. The world of mathematics is supposed to be pure, untouched by the filth and hardship of daily life. But your reality is otherwise. Every sum is damp, every proof a struggle against decay. Your stomach grumbles. You cannot remember the last time you felt truly warm, or truly full, or truly focused. Your back aches from the endless hours spent hunched over this pitiful desk. Your eyes water from the smoke of last night's fire, a fire that gave up long before you did. The village is quiet, the silence broken only by the drip of water from the roof and the occasional squawk of a chicken outside. You sigh, push aside your work, and stand. You pace your small room, stomping your feet, trying to force some feeling back into your extremities. The exercise does little but make you more aware of your own hunger and exhaustion. There is no comfort here, only the dull, persistent ache of survival. You return to your seat, determined to make one more attempt. You pick up your pen, steady your hand, and force yourself to focus on the numbers. You chase the solution as you might chase warmth, knowing that it will always elude you, but refusing to give up. You scratch out another line, blotting ink from the parchment. You do the work because it is all you can do. Outside, the cold intensifies, the light fades, and you wonder how much longer you can endure this. But endurance is all you have ever known. The world is cold, the slush is endless, and reason must make its stand against both, one trembling calculation at a time. You look at the page, your writing wobbly but legible, and you allow yourself a small, bitter smile. Perhaps you think, the greatest proof of all is not in the numbers, but in your stubborn refusal to stop writing them. Paranoia is not an illness here, it is survival. You are a mathematician, yes, but that word is dangerous. There are whispers in the market and rumors by the fireside, stories traded like currency about men dragged from their beds for owning suspicious books, about the local healer who vanished after someone found diagrams in her kitchen, about the tailor's nephew. No one saw him after he began to ask too many questions. You keep your head down, but numbers have a way of making you stand out. A simple calculation on a scrap of parchment is harmless to you, but to your neighbors, it might as well be a secret code, a charm, or the opening move in a pact with the devil. You have learned to disguise your work. What looks like a multiplication table might be the day's accounting, a column of sums disguised as a shopping list, a diagram of geometric proof hidden among the circles and lines of a plan for the chicken coop. Even your ink stains are a little too suspicious for comfort. There is nothing noble in your fear. It is a cold, clinging thing, as ever present as the mold on your bread or the slush at your door. You feel it every time a shadow passes your window, every time footsteps stop just outside your home, every time the priest's voice rings out on Sunday with that peculiar emphasis on the dangers of unrighteous knowledge. You try to meet no one's eyes in the street, to offer only bland answers to questions, to avoid any conversation about numbers, signs, or the workings of the heavens. The Inquisition is a distant rumor in your tiny village, but its reach is everywhere. There are stories of traveling friars with keen eyes and clever tongues, of men in black who ask innocent questions and leave with a list of names. Sometimes they visit the towns along the trade roads. Sometimes you hear they arrive without warning, a shadow at the door, a quiet knock in the middle of the night. You have seen smoke rising from a neighboring village, and no one asks whose home burned or what happened to the family within. You remember the first time you truly felt the danger. It was a spring evening years ago when you tried to explain to the miller's cousin why the moon's phases repeat in a pattern and why that pattern could be measured. You thought you were helping, a practical application of numbers. The cousin listened, nodded, then narrowed his eyes and asked quietly, "How do you know such things? Are you sure you should?" The silence that followed was heavy, charged, and you learned to hide your thoughts behind a mask of ignorance. Your home is a fortress of secrets. The loose board beneath your bed is your library and your confessional, a hiding place for your one battered book and a handful of notes scrawled in a trembling hand. You move the hiding spot often. Today beneath the hearth, tomorrow behind a loose stone in the wall. You have become expert at feigning surprise, at feigning stupidity, at explaining away the odd ink stains on your hands as a spill, the diagrams on your slate as a way to plan the spring planting. Even when no one is watching, you do not let your guard down. The walls, after all, are thin. Every so often, the church summons the village to the square. The priest stands on a rough platform and reads out the latest warnings from the bishop. Do not trust strangers. Do not question the words of the church. Do not dabble in forbidden knowledge. He does not look at you, not exactly, but you feel the weight of his words settling on your shoulders like a shroud. The crowd murmurs assent. Some cross themselves, others spit on the ground. You stand in the back, silent, invisible if you can manage it. You dream of fire, not the warm, comforting blaze in a hearth, but the hungry fire of the stake. You see yourself dragged from your bed, your book seized and tossed onto the flames, your life reduced to ashes. You know, as everyone does, that once the accusation is made, innocence is irrelevant. You have watched the priest nod knowingly at the mention of dangerous ideas, seen him mark his ledger with a careful hand, seen the fearful looks exchanged by neighbors when your name is mentioned. You begin to see spies everywhere. The boy who lingers too long by your door, does he know what you are doing? The neighbor who glances through your window as she walks by, is she reporting what she sees? You develop rituals, triple checking the locks, stashing your papers in ever more ingenious hiding places, practicing lies in case you are questioned. When you walk through the village, you count your steps, your breaths, the number of people you pass. You try not to count the days until something happens. Sometimes, in the evenings, you look up at the sky and remember that the world is vast and full of mysteries you long to understand. But even the stars are suspect. The church warns against the study of the heavens. You have heard of men burned as heretics for owning an astrolabe or a chart of the moon's movement. You do not own such things, of course, but you fear that even your interest is dangerous. Curiosity itself can be a crime. When you sleep, you dream of numbers, endless, swirling, uncountable. But you also dream of footsteps on the stairs, of voices outside your door, of the sickly sweet smell of burning flesh. You wake in the darkness, heart pounding, and listen for sounds in the street. Sometimes there is nothing but the wind. Sometimes you hear the bark of a dog, the creak of a wagon, the slow, measured steps of someone going nowhere in particular. You try to go back to sleep, but the fear is never far away. One morning, you find a scrap of parchment stuffed under your door, a crude drawing of a devil, horns and tail, grinning and surrounded by numbers. Is it a child's prank? A warning? You burn it in the hearth, just in case. You wonder sometimes why you persist. Why risk everything for a handful of ideas that no one wants, that most would happily destroy? But the truth is that you cannot stop. The habit of thought, the itch of curiosity, is stronger than your fear. Every time you solve a problem, every time you glimpse some order in the chaos, you remember what it is to be alive. The fear does not go away, but it neither does the hope. So you continue, careful and cautious, your mind a hidden lantern in the darkness. You do not trust, but you do not surrender. Every line you draw is a small act of defiance, every calculation a quiet rebellion. You may never be remembered, but you will not forget yourself. Outside, the village settles into another night. The shadows lengthen, and the silence deepens. You sit by the cold hearth, your book safely hidden, and listen for the footsteps that sooner or later will surely come. There is a knock at your door, firm, insistent, the kind that never bodes well. You freeze, instinctively glancing toward the loose floorboard where your book is hidden. The second knock comes, sharper this time, and you force yourself to breathe. No one ever comes for good news. You open the door a crack. On your threshold stands Geoffrey, the tenant farmer from 2 cottages down. He looks uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot, hat in his hands. Behind him, the village dog roots in a pile of mud, unconcerned with human dramas. Morning, Geoffrey mutters, eyes darting past you into the gloom of your home. I was wondering if you might, help me with something. You nod, stepping aside. No one refuses a neighbor here, not unless you want to be the next subject of whispers. He ducks his head and enters, clutching a dirty scrap of parchment, a tally of some kind, marked with notches and crude figures. Is it about the rent? You ask, gesturing to the table where the day's meager breakfast remnants still linger. Worse, he says, sighing. It's the grain. I cannot make the sums work. If I am wrong, the children go hungry, or the landlord comes knocking. He looks up, eyes bloodshot with worry. You know your numbers. They say you can make sense of such things. You sit together, hunched over the scrap, heads nearly touching in the chilly air. The marks are familiar, columns of tallies for sacks, bushels, borrowed measures. Some numbers have been crossed out and rewritten, others are half erased, leaving only ghosts. The figures never add up cleanly, and you can see Jeffrey's anxiety in every smudge. You begin the grim ritual of arithmetic, fingers moving across the table as you count. You started with 9 sacks at harvest, you murmur, and you sold 2 at market, kept one aside for seed. That leaves 6. You glance at him, waiting for a nod. He frowns, struggling to keep up. But I paid 3 to the miller for grinding, and gave 2 to the landlord for rent. Should be 1 left, but the children have eaten more than that these past weeks. You sigh. The numbers never lie, but people do. Sometimes to others, sometimes to themselves. You run through the figures again, searching for some forgotten bundle, some miscounted meal. Did you sell any eggs at market? You ask, trying to trace the trail of barter and exchange. He shakes his head. The hens are not laying, not since the cold set in. I borrowed flour from Marta, but I was sure I paid her back. You see the error buried in the confusion of notches and trades. A sack was counted twice, a simple mistake, but one that means the difference between a full belly and an empty one. You pointed out gently, knowing how easy it is to take offense. Here, this mark. Did you use it for the miller and the landlord both? Jeffrey flushes, embarrassment warring with relief. I suppose I did. That means, that means you have nothing left. Save the seed for planting. You will need to borrow until next harvest. The words are heavy, each one a blow. He nods, silent. You see the future in his face, meager meals, anxious nights, the slow, grinding fear of want. It is the same future you see in every home here, the future the numbers always spell out in blunt, merciless terms. You try to soften the truth, to offer some comfort. Perhaps Marta can lend you a little more, or you can trade labor for grain. The miller is always looking for help mending his roof. The advice is thin, but it is all you have. He stands, clutching the parchment as if it were a curse. Thank you, he mutters, his gratitude edged with shame. You always were clever with figures. You want to protest that cleverness is not enough, that no sum or equation can conjure food from bare earth, but you only nod, watching as he steps back into the gray daylight, shoulders hunched against more than the cold. You sit back, rubbing your eyes. The encounter leaves you drained, as it always does. In a world where so little is certain, the role of mathematician is a bitter privilege. You hold the power to reveal the truth, and in this place, the truth is always harsher than any lie. You remember other visits, other desperate neighbors, the widow who begged you to reckon the value of her late husband's debts, her eyes pleading for a number smaller than reality. The old shepherd who brought a bag of coins, so battered and mixed that no one, not even the priest, could say if they added up to the proper tithe. The landlord himself, who demanded you count his livestock, suspecting his tenants of theft. In every case, you are the messenger, the reluctant bearer of bad tidings, the voice that confirms their worst suspicions. The stakes are higher than simple mathematics. A miscount might mean a week without bread, a winter of hunger, a furious confrontation with a neighbor who believes he has been cheated. You try to explain, gently, that numbers have no malice, that mistakes are only human, but you see the resentment simmering behind every nervous smile. There are times when you are tempted to lie, to fudge the figures, to invent a missing sack, to erase a debt. You know others would do it without a second thought, but you remember the fate of those who were caught. The baker who lost a handful of coins and ended up in the stocks. The laborer whose false account was discovered and who now works the Lord's fields without pay. The cost of error is high, and the cost of dishonesty higher still. When the house is quiet again, you turn to your own accounts. Your stores are not much better than Jeffrey's. A handful of root vegetables, a sack of barley, a little salt, a few coins, most of them already spoken for in rent or barter. You tally each item with grim precision, knowing that you are only ever one mistake away from the same fate as your neighbor. There is no comfort in accuracy. Your numbers march across the page like an army of tiny executioners, each one a step closer to the inevitable. You wonder, as you always do, if the villagers would despise you less if you were worse at counting, or if they would blame you more for the disasters you failed to prevent. Sometimes, in the deepest watches of the night, you find yourself questioning the value of your craft. What good is arithmetic when there is so little to count? What use is careful reckoning when all it yields is misery? You remember the scholars whose names you once read, those whose theorems changed the world, who measured the stars, who wrote their own destinies. Your world is smaller, your sums grimmer, your legacy measured in empty sacks and hungry bellies. Yet you cannot stop. The habit is too deep, the need for order too strong. You keep your accounts, for yourself if for no one else, recording each handful of grain, each borrowed cup of flour, each day that passes without disaster. It is not hope, exactly, but it is the closest you have. Evening falls, dark and cold. You light your lamp, barely more than a sputtering wick floating in fat, and scan your figures one last time. The numbers are as they were, too few, too small, too unforgiving. You close your book, tuck it away, and draw your blanket tight around your shoulders. Outside, you hear the faint, mournful sound of a child crying, the mutter of adults too tired to comfort. You close your eyes, trying not to calculate the odds that tomorrow will be better. But even now, as you drift toward sleep, you count the hours, the days, the empty spaces in your ledger. The mathematics of hunger is cruel, but it is all you have to keep the world from slipping into chaos. You are always hungry. There is no day when your stomach does not remind you of its emptiness. No night when you do not dream of food. Hunger is a rhythm older than mathematics, a daily tolling of the body's bell, echoing through your thoughts as surely as any calculation or proof. You measure your life in meals, half meals, quarter meals, in scraps and tastes and dreams that never come true. You remember dimly a time when hunger was just an inconvenience, something to be satisfied with a crust of bread or a handful of beans. Perhaps you were younger, or perhaps the world was less cruel then. Now, hunger is the constant background noise of your existence. It haunts you through every task, distracts you from your sums, turns your thoughts sluggish and resentful. Every morning begins with hope, a foolish, stubborn hope that today there will be more to eat. You check your stores as if they might have multiplied in the night. The same sack of barley, the same shriveled onions, the same handful of salt. There is rarely anything new. Sometimes a neighbor will offer a crust or a cup of broth in exchange for this some calculation or advice, but it is never enough. You ration every crumb, counting and recounting, slicing bread so thin you can see the cracks of the table through it. Your body adapts. It grows lean, then gaunt. Your skin sags around your bones. Your eyes sink deeper into your skull. When you catch a glimpse of yourself in a bucket of water or a polished pan, you almost do not recognize the face staring back, sharp, hollow, older than you remember becoming. You wonder if you would be able to tell, by numbers alone, how much you have lost. You move slower now, conserving energy. Every chore is a calculation. How much effort will it take? How much will it cost you in strength? How long before the dizziness forces you to sit and rest? You plan your day around your hunger, saving your most difficult tasks for the rare moments when you have managed to eat. Your mind drifts, always, to thoughts of food, the taste of butter, the warmth of a hearty stew, the impossible sweetness of a ripe apple. The dreams only make the reality sharper, more cruel. You are not alone in your hunger. The village is a patchwork of want. You see it in the eyes of the children, wide and desperate, in the pinched faces of mothers, in the way even the animals scavenge for scraps. Meals are never discussed openly. To talk of hunger is to admit defeat. Instead, there are polite fictions. I have already eaten. I am not hungry today. I am saving this for later. Everyone knows the truth. Everyone knows the lies. Your calculations change with your appetite. Once you found pleasure in the intricacies of algebra, the puzzles of geometry. Now, your mind is consumed with more immediate sums. How many beans remain in the jar? How long a loaf must last? How many hours until your next meal? The abstract beauty of mathematics fades. What remains is survival, reduction, the bare bones of logic stripped of joy. Sometimes hunger becomes anger, a quiet, smoldering resentment against the world, the weather, the landlords and merchants, even against your own body, for needing so much and giving so little in return. You find yourself envying the chickens, who seem content with scraps and worms, who do not know the torment of anticipation, who eat when they are able and forget the rest. You wish at times that you could forget as easily. There are days when your hunger sharpens you, your senses become acute, your thoughts clear and piercing, You can see every flaw in your calculations, every mistake in the household accounts. You solve problems with a kind of manic energy driven by the need to distract yourself from the gnawing pain in your belly. But this focus is fleeting. Soon the weakness returns, and with it a fog that settles over your mind, making it impossible to think of anything but food. You have learned the mathematics of disappointment. You know, without looking, that there will be nothing special at the next meal, nothing to celebrate. You know from long experience how hope shrinks with every passing day until it is nothing but a flicker. You learn to count not just the days since your last real meal, but the days you have managed to endure without complaint. It is a grim kind of pride. Sometimes a festival or a holiday brings a brief reprieve, a communal meal, a bowl of stew passed around, the rare luxury of meat or cheese. But these moments are fleeting, and the memory of fullness only makes the return to hunger harder to bear. The church hands out scraps to the poorest, but pride keeps many away, and the priest never fails to remind everyone that charity is conditional and always in short supply. You dream often of abundance, of sitting at a table laden with food, of eating your fill and then some, of feeling the warmth of satisfaction spread through your limbs. You wake from these dreams with a start, mouth watering, stomach cramping, heart pounding with disappointment. You tell yourself it is foolish to hope, but the hope persists, stubborn as a weed. You try, sometimes, to distract yourself with your studies. Numbers are constant, reliable, immune to hunger. But even they betray you. Every equation becomes a reminder of what you lack. Every ratio, a calculation of scarcity. The perfect symmetry of a solved problem offers a brief comfort, but it fades quickly, replaced by the relentless demands of your body. The hunger changes you, shapes your days and your thoughts. You become cautious, calculating, careful not to waste, careful not to hope too much. You become silent, withdrawing from conversations, from gatherings, from anything that might remind you of what you do not have. You watch the world with the wary eyes of a creature always on the brink of starvation. And yet, you endure. You eat your crust of bread, your thin soup, your bitter greens, and you tell yourself it is enough. You count the days, the crumbs, the hours until sleep. You survive, not because you are strong, but because you have no other choice. The mathematics of hunger is unforgiving, but it is, in its way, a proof. You are still here, still counting, still alive. You know that tomorrow will be the same. The hunger will wake with you, follow you through your chores, sit beside you as you write your numbers, haunt your dreams as you sleep. It is always there, a silent companion, a constant reminder that the world is not built for comfort, not for people like you. But for now, you gather your meager meal, measure it with care, and eat. You close your eyes, imagining a world where numbers can add up to plenty, and tell yourself that someday, somehow, the sum might change. You have long suspected that the greatest mathematician in the village is not you, but death. Death keeps his own ledgers, counts with grim precision, tallies every cough and fever, every miscarriage, every child buried beneath a stone so small that even the priest forgets its place. If you ever doubted the power of numbers, you have only to look around. The statistics are everywhere, etched into the faces of your neighbors and the empty spaces where laughter used to live. You do not keep these numbers for pleasure. In fact, you wish you could stop counting altogether. But the habit is too deeply ingrained, and there is something in you that needs to know, needs to measure the losses even when there is no one to listen. Sometimes, late at night, you scratch marks into a piece of slate, recording the passing of another villager, the old woman 3 doors down, who died of a winter cough, the child who never recovered from the fever, the sturdy farmer felled by an infected wound. Your list grows longer every season. The church keeps its own records, births and deaths, baptisms and burials, but you know those lists are incomplete. The priest does not bother to write down the deaths of infants who lived less than a week, or of the old beggar who wandered in one night and was gone by morning. The numbers that matter to the church are the numbers that bring coin, tithes, offerings, the cost of funerals. Your account is quieter and far more honest. You try, sometimes, to explain the arithmetic of disease to your neighbors. When 5 fall ill, 2 will die, you say, careful not to sound too certain, careful not to frighten them more than necessary. If the fever spreads to 10, perhaps 4 or 5 will be lost. You watch their faces tighten, their eyes harden. They do not want your predictions, your impersonal percentages, your neat little sums. To them, each death is unique, a wound that numbers cannot heal. Still, the patterns repeat, as constant as sunrise and sunset. The cough begins in the children, passes to the mothers, then to the old men who have survived too many winters already. You see it each year, the same sequence, the same silent dread that settles over the village as the first cold rains arrive. You hear the whispers, the prayers, the quiet curses as one home after another draws its shutters tight. Disease does not respect wisdom or faith. You have seen it strike the priest, the blacksmith, the wealthiest farmer. It favors the weak, but even the strong fall before it. You have watched entire families disappear one by one until their house stands empty, the door swinging in the wind. You record these disappearances too, noting the date and, if you know it, the cause. You do not believe in omens, but sometimes you cannot help but see patterns where none should exist. A run of 3 deaths in as many days, all on the same street, a sudden cluster of coughs among the children born in spring. You tell yourself it is only coincidence, but a part of you wonders if the numbers are trying to tell you something, if only you could read them clearly enough. Your own health is precarious, though you try to ignore the warning signs. A persistent cough, a sore throat that will not go away, the ache in your joints that grows worse with every cold morning. You count your own symptoms as you count everything else, half convinced that careful reckoning might grant you some measure of control, it never does. The physician in the nearest town, such as he is, has little more to offer than leeches, herbal concoctions, and stern warnings against bad air. You have seen his remedies work as often as they fail. Your neighbors trust him only because he is not the priest. And when both men agree that a patient is lost, there is nothing left but prayer. There is a peculiar mathematics to funerals here. The wealthier families pay for a coffin, for a priest to recite the proper words, for bread and ale to share among the mourners. The poor are buried quickly, sometimes without a marker, sometimes without a prayer. You have noticed that the number of mourners always seems to shrink with each new death, as fear outpaces grief. Some funerals are so sparsely attended that you wonder if the dead might rise simply out of loneliness. You keep your own statistics, year by year, marking the rise and fall of the village's fortunes. Some years are better, fewer deaths, more births, a sense that things might be improving. But the trend is always downward. The graveyard grows, the houses empty. You can measure the decline in footsteps, in the distance between living neighbors, in the silence that settles over the village each dusk. Children, especially, are at the mercy of the numbers. You have watched mothers count their offspring in whispers, as if saying the number aloud might attract the attention of whatever spirit carries them away. Of 10 children born, only 3 or 4 will see adulthood, sometimes fewer. The survivors are tough, wary, and older than their years. You see in their eyes the same exhaustion you feel, a resignation, a grim acceptance of the world's arithmetic. Sometimes a new illness sweeps through the village, a fever that burns bright and fast, a rash that spreads from house to house, a cough that leaves its victims gasping for air. You see the patterns, the curve of the epidemic rising and falling, the desperate attempts at quarantine, the hopeful prayers, the inevitable failures. You watch as families close their doors, avoid each other in the street, pass rumors faster than the sickness itself. You wish sometimes that you could do more than count, that you could find some logic, some pattern that might help you predict the next wave, warn your neighbors, save a life. But the numbers are pitiless. They offer no hope, no answers. They only mark the boundaries of your ignorance. You wonder what the future will make of your notes, if anyone will ever care how many died, how many survived, how the village shrank year by year. Perhaps someday, some scholar will discover your lists and see them as more than a catalog of misery. Perhaps they will see a warning or a lesson, or perhaps, like everything else here, your records will be lost, washed away by rain, eaten by mice, burned to warm some other mathematician's cold hands. Night falls, and you put away your slate, sweeping the chalk dust into your palm. You sit by the hearth, listening to the coughing from the next house, counting the seconds between each fit. It is not hope that you feel, nor even fear. It is simply the knowledge that, as always, the numbers will have the final say. If you ever imagined the pursuit of knowledge as a noble and tranquil calling, You have long since abandoned such fantasies. Your school is nothing like the hallowed halls in the stories. No arches, no rows of desks, no hush of attentive minds. It is, at best, a chaotic assembly of reluctant pupils squeezed into your cramped kitchen, with the constant threat of violence lurking just behind the scraping of benches and the shuffle of muddy feet. The village boys are sent to you not because their parents dream of producing learned men, but because they hope to keep their children out of the cold for an hour, or to escape their own company. Some come to dodge chores, others as punishment for past mischief. Education here is less a privilege than a sentence. You see it in their eyes every morning, the calculation, the weighing of risk and reward, the boredom already taking root. You start the lesson as you always do, with a silent prayer for patience. You try to recite the numbers, to explain the basics of division, to draw simple shapes on the slate. But the boys have other amusements in mind. Tommaso, forever the instigator, flicks bits of straw at Bert, who responds in kind, until the air between them is thick with projectiles and the beginnings of a scuffle. Enough, you snap, attempting authority you do not feel. For a brief moment, your voice works. There is silence, then a snicker. Tommaso kicks the leg of the bench and Bert swings his elbow in retaliation. The two are locked in a silent war, each waiting for the other to escalate. Marta, the rare girl in your lessons, watches with a look of grim satisfaction, enjoying the spectacle. You attempt to restore order. Let us try again. If 3 loaves are divided among 6 children, why would anyone do that? Tommaso interrupts, eyes glinting. There's never enough bread for 6. Especially if Marta's there, Bert adds, and the room erupts in laughter. You grit your teeth. Discipline is a game of attrition. Some teachers rely on threats, others on the rod. You have a switch, a thin, flexible branch that sits by the door, a warning more than a promise. You would prefer never to use it, but the boys know this. To them, every lesson is a test. How far can they push before you snap? How much mischief can be squeezed into an hour of supposed learning? The fights, when they come, are sudden and vicious. It starts with an insult, always petty, always the same. One boy shoves another, a fist is raised, and soon the kitchen is a chaos of flying limbs and overturned benches. You lunge to separate them, dodging a stray elbow, feeling the old ache in your back flare as you pull Tommaso away from Bert's throat. The punishments are expected. You wave the switch in the air, your voice hard. The boys fall silent, eyes wide, not with fear, but with calculation. They know you are reluctant to strike. The threat is enough to buy a few minutes of sullen quiet, during which you press on with the lesson, praying for time to pass quickly. But order never lasts. The village culture values strength and cunning more than learning. The boys trade bruises and insults with an energy you wish they would spend on their sums. Sometimes, when a fight gets particularly nasty, a father arrives, belt in hand, dragging his son home with promises of a harsher lesson. Other times, the boys settle their own scores behind the stables, out of your sight, but never out of your hearing. The rare moments of peace come when exhaustion finally wins. The boys slouch in their seats, breathing heavily, eyes glazed. You seize the opportunity, scribbling a few more numbers on the slate, whispering explanations into the quiet, as if hoping the knowledge might seep in by accident. You envy the scholars of old, the monks in their scriptoria, the students in the great universities of distant lands, their worst distractions no more dangerous than a snoring neighbor. You imagine what it would be like to teach eager minds, to nurture talent instead of constantly suppressing chaos. But those are idle dreams. Here, intelligence is a liability, a thing to be hidden or mocked. Corporal punishment is not reserved for the classroom. In the village, a whipping is a common solution for most problems. For tardiness, for theft, for defiance. You hear the crack of the rod in the street, see the welts on the backs of boys who return to your lessons, surlier but no wiser. It is not learning, but a grim choreography of pain and shame, endlessly repeated. You try, when you can, to offer small kindnesses, a slice of bread, a gentle word, a moment of praise for a correct answer. Sometimes a flicker of pride lights up a child's face, but it fades quickly, drowned by laughter or scorn from the others. The village teaches its children to be tough, to distrust cleverness, to view every lesson as a contest of wills. Your greatest fear is that one day the fights will go too far. Already you have seen blood on the floor, a broken tooth, a blackened eye. Each injury is a blow to your resolve. You wonder if it would not be better to give up the lessons entirely, to let the boys spend their days in the fields or the forge, free from your futile attempts at order. But still you persist. You sweep the floor, set the benches right, mend the slate, and call them back the next day. You repeat the lessons, you weather the fights, you wield the rod with a trembling hand. It is not hope that drives you, nor even stubbornness, but habit, the same grim habit that keeps you counting, keeps you measuring the days as they slide by in an endless parade of hunger, fear, and disappointment. In the end, you know, most of your pupils will remember nothing but the fights and the flogging, their real education. The numbers will fade, but the bruises will remain, marks of a childhood spent in struggle, not study. The kitchen grows quiet as the lesson ends. The boys file out, shoving each other in the doorway, already forgetting everything you tried to teach. You watch them go, heart heavy, hands sore, mind exhausted. You sit down, alone, surrounded by the relics of the day's chaos. Outside, the village is alive with noise and motion, but in your kitchen, all that lingers is the echo of angry voices and the faint hope that somehow tomorrow might be different. But you know the odds. You have done the calculations. Tomorrow will be just the same. You have often thought that numbers are the one realm untouched by malice or desire, a place where logic reigns and every answer is pure. The world, of course, has different ideas, especially the world of women, marriage, and gossip. In the village, mathematics is a man's business only when it comes to taxes, land, or market weights. For everything else, marriage, birth, death, the workings of fate, numbers are suspect, and those who wield them are viewed with a blend of suspicion and superstitious awe. This morning, you are interrupted in your calculations by a sharp rap at your door. It is Marta's mother, Lucetta, cheeks red with cold and eyes burning with the curiosity of a woman with more questions than patience. She marches into your room, skirts muddy, hair pinned back with all the force of a woman who has no time for nonsense. She does not waste time on pleasantries. You know about numbers, she says, as if it is both accusation and compliment. Tell me true, how many years does a woman have to put up with a husband before the saints take pity and call him home? You glance at her, trying to gauge her seriousness. Her lips are pressed in a thin line, but there is a glint in her eye, a mixture of resentment and mischief. You sense that whatever answer you offer, it will become the stuff of legend by nightfall, twisted and embroidered by every tongue in the village. Hard to say, Lucetta, you reply cautiously, but I suspect it depends on the man, the marriage, and the forbearance of the saints. She sits heavily on your only stool, folding her arms. Do not play with me. I have counted the days, the months, the winters, 17 years by my reckoning. Still he snores, still he drinks, still he curses the pig for being lazier than he is. You almost laugh, but catch yourself. The role of village confidant is a dangerous one, especially when it comes to marriage. More than once, you have found yourself drawn into bitter spats and whispered accusations. A misplaced word from you might become a reason for someone's next beating, or the excuse for a quarrel to erupt in the square. Lucetta's grievances are not unique. The women of the village come to you for numbers, but rarely for solutions. They want reassurance, sometimes justification. If I have borne him 4 children and buried 2, does that mean the saints owe me some rest? She demands. You start to answer, but she cuts you off, voice rising. And another thing, how come the widow Fenella down the lane, who never goes to church, has lived these 40 years in peace, while I, who bake the priest's bread and sweep the chapel, must scrub and mend and scold till my hands crack? You shrug, knowing the futility of logic here. Numbers are cruel, Lucetta. Sometimes they give nothing but hard truths. She glares. I do not want your truths. I want a bit of justice. Can you reckon that, scholar? You smile weakly, retreating to the safety of abstraction. In my reckoning, every woman in this village is owed a miracle, but the saints are stingy, and the odds are not in our favor. That answer at least amuses her. She chuckles, shaking her head. You are no help, but at least you speak plain. My Marta says you fill her head with nonsense, triangles and counting, as if she needs such things to bake bread. You think of Marta, sharp-eyed, quick witted, forever watching the boys wrestle and the men posture, quietly memorizing everything. She is one of the few who listens to your lessons, even if only to mock you later. You wonder what she might become in a different world. Lucetta's gaze softens, and she leans closer. Is there any use for such knowledge? For a girl, I mean. Besides counting loaves or keeping score in a quarrel, you hesitate. To speak of women's learning is to invite trouble, but the truth gnaws at you. There is always use in knowing how to reckon, you say quietly. Numbers do not care if you are a man or a woman. They care only for truth. She grunts. Truth is good, but bread is better. See to it that Marta learns to count without growing strange, will you? You promise, though you know it is a promise you cannot keep. Every lesson you give Marta draws the eyes and gossip of the village. Some say you are trying to steal her wits, or worse. The blacksmith's wife claims you are filling her head with dangerous ideas. The priest's sister whispers of old stories, of clever girls gone mad from too much thinking. It is not just Marta. Whenever a woman shows interest in your sums or sketches, the same pattern unfolds. At first, there is laughter, gentle teasing, a kind of curiosity. Then comes suspicion, then scorn. If a wife asks her husband about your lessons, the house is filled with arguments for days. If a daughter copies a diagram into the mud, the mother will scrub it away, muttering prayers. Numbers, it seems, are a threat to the fragile order of things, and yet the women persist. They watch you work, ask you quiet questions at the well, bring you baskets of eggs and scraps of news. They keep their minds sharp and their tongues sharper. You suspect that if the men left for a week, the village would run better and with fewer fights in your kitchen. But every kindness is shadowed by malice. The same women who bring you food will also bring you trouble if it suits their purpose. More than once, you have heard your own words thrown back at you in a quarrel you did not start, or seen your calculations blamed for a run of bad luck or a sickly cow. When a marriage goes wrong, when a child falls ill, when a batch of bread will not rise, someone will remember the day you spoke of ratios or gave a lesson on dividing apples. You become, in the eyes of many, both wizard and scapegoat, too clever by half, too willing to meddle in the mysteries of birth and fate. The priest preaches caution, the gossips whisper warnings. You walk a narrow path, each answer weighed, each word measured, knowing that numbers offer no protection from the malice of a village hungry for answers and quick to find blame. Lucetta stands to leave, satisfied or at least distracted. If you hear the saints, tell them I am waiting, she says, smiling wryly. You nod, knowing she will return, as they all do, when the next question gnaws at her or when the balance of her life tips out of order. You watch her go, then return to your sums, head heavy with the weight of things you cannot change. Numbers, you tell yourself, are simple. People are the real riddle, full of envy, hope, and malice in equal measure. As the day ends, you realize that, for all your calculations, you have never managed to find a formula for peace, least of all between women, men, and the bitter, muddled world in which you live. Night falls like a heavy curtain in the village, bringing not peace, but an intensified sense of isolation. As the last faint daylight seeps through the cracks in your shutter, you are reminded, again, how entirely you live at the mercy of darkness. There are no street lamps, no glowing hearths casting golden halos onto cobbled roads. The world at night is a tangle of deep shadows, uncertain noises, and the ever present fear that comes when you can neither see nor be seen. You glance at your candle stub, the last precious remnant of tallow. You turn it over in your hand, calculating how long it might last. Perhaps half an hour, if you ration the flame, if you do not let your mind wander and waste the meager light on idle scribbles or pointless equations. You hesitate. The urge to work, to push back against the blankness, is strong. But you know how it goes. Use the candle now, and tomorrow's night will be longer, darker, colder. You do not light it. Instead, you fumble for your notes by the memory of their place, tracing the outlines of your latest calculations with your fingertips. The pages are soft, worn by use and smudged by dirty hands and leaking ink. You tell yourself you can work in the dark, that your mind remembers every sum, every ratio, every line and curve. You pretend that you do not need light to think. The cold, which has stalked you all day, seeps in with renewed strength now that the sun has disappeared. Your fingers ache. Your breath is visible in the gloom, a thin cloud rising and vanishing. You pull your blanket tighter, shivering as you tuck your knees beneath your chin, shrinking your body into as small a ball as possible. The fire is long dead. You burned the last stick of wood 3 days ago, and the embers never truly recovered. From outside comes the dull thud of a door closing, then silence. You hear the wind, the occasional bark of a hungry dog, the distant arguments of neighbors already tired from a day spent hungry and cold. Every sound is amplified by the dark, made mysterious and sinister by the absence of sight. You listen for footsteps, for the cough of disease, for anything that might mean you are not alone in your little room. You close your eyes and picture the world as it must look now. The fields stretched in darkness, the river a ribbon of blackness between banks of indistinguishable mud. The village square is empty, save for the old stocks, a ghostly shape against the sky. And in each house, families huddle together, murmuring quiet words or saying evening prayers. Some will talk of saints and spirits. Others will curse their luck, their landlords, their hungry children. All will sleep with one eye open, wary of what the darkness may bring. You try, as always, to use the darkness as a tool to turn it into something productive. You compose proofs in your head, running through the steps as you remember them, testing each link in the chain. Sometimes the answers come easily, and you are grateful. More often, Your mind trips and stumbles, distracted by the ache in your belly, by the relentless itching of old lice, by the endless chorus of worries that crowd your thoughts as soon as the light is gone. The dark is an enemy to reason. You have no illusions about that. Without light, the boundaries between things blur and dissolve. The numbers, so clear and orderly on the page, become shadows in your mind, unreliable and prone to slip away. You chase solutions through a maze of half remembered rules, always just out of reach. Your memory plays tricks. Was it 3 or 5 steps to find the square root? Did you already carry the one, or have you left it hanging, a ghost in the calculation? You have heard tales of scholars in distant cities who work by lamplight deep into the night, whose rooms are lined with shelves of books and scrolls. You cannot imagine such luxury. Here, a candle is worth more than a day's food, a sheet of parchment more precious than meat. Knowledge grows slowly, hoarded and hidden, passed from mind to mind, like a secret flame, easy to lose, easy to extinguish. Sometimes you do risk the candle. You light it with trembling hands, shielding the fragile flame from the drafts that slip through the walls. The room fills with a faint, greasy light. You rush to work, scribbling lines and numbers, fighting against time. The candle guttering low is your only clock, each flicker a warning that your small island of vision is shrinking. But tonight, you hold back. Tonight, you let the dark win, if only to keep hope of light for another night. Instead, you listen to your own breathing, to the scrape of rats in the walls, to the distant howl of the wind through the village streets. Sometimes the noises are comforting, sometimes they are terrifying. Always, they are reminders of how thin the barrier is between your life and oblivion. Your thoughts drift to all you have lost to darkness, notes dropped and never found, proofs forgotten between sleep and waking, the shape of a solution fading as soon as the light is gone. You wonder, with a kind of bitter amusement, if the history of mathematics is not mostly the history of things lost in the night. Sleep does not come easily, not here, not now. The cold makes your muscles tense and your joints ache. Your mind keeps turning, restless, like a wheel stuck in deep mud. You count your breaths, your heartbeats, the distant tolling of the church bell marking the hour. The numbers bring no comfort, only a reminder of how slowly the night moves, how long you must wait for the faint, gray promise of morning. You tell yourself that tomorrow will be brighter, that there will be more light, more warmth, more hope. But you know the odds. You have done the calculations. Tonight, like so many nights before, you endure the darkness, clutching your blanket and your thoughts, hoping only that the dawn will come before your last bit of tallow is gone. And so you wait, mathematician in the dark, scribbler of lost proofs, survivor of endless, lightless evenings. When morning finally arrives, it will find you as it always does, tired, cold, a little more frayed around the edges, but still counting. As dawn creeps reluctantly across the horizon, You greet the morning with the same sense of low expectations that has become your default setting. There is no dramatic sunrise, only a slow fading of the blackness, a slight easing of shadows as the world shifts from absolute night to a more ambiguous, miserable gray. You emerge from your blanket as if from a cocoon, shivering, your body stiff with the ache of cold and poor sleep. Your first chore, before water, before bread, before even shooing the chickens from the doorway, is to assess the damage wrought by your most constant and destructive companions, the mice. These are not the cute storybook creatures of future children's tales, but sharp eyed, desperate survivors, little tyrants of the night. You have tried every trick you know to keep them at bay, hanging bread from rafters, plugging cracks with rags, banging on the walls at intervals like a madman. It makes no difference. Mice are cleverer than hunger and twice as persistent. You tiptoe across the floor, careful to avoid the loose board where your book is hidden. The mice have grown bold, leaving little evidence of their presence. Gnawed edges on sacks, droppings scattered across the hard packed dirt, a gnawed corner of your last decent page of parchment. You bend to inspect your stores. Another potato gone, a tiny hole chewed in the barley sack, flour scattered like snow across the hearth. You sigh, a sound so familiar now that it feels like part of your breathing. Their favorite prize, however, is not your food, but your ink. The faint, bitter tang attracts them for reasons you will never understand. You check the inkwell, dreading what you will find. Sure enough, the little wooden stopper has been knocked aside, the ink itself fouled with dust, mouse hair, and, on particularly unlucky mornings, a drowned mouse lying still at the bottom of the pot. This morning it is only a few hairs, a lesser tragedy, but a tragedy all the same. You try to salvage what you can. You strain the ink through a scrap of cloth, watching as the precious black liquid filters into a chipped cup. Each drop is valuable, the result of days spent gathering soot and mixing it with water and vinegar, praying for the right consistency, mourning every failed batch. Ink is your lifeline, the only way you have to make marks that might outlast the day, yet it is always at risk, vulnerable to mice, spills, careless hands, and time. Your pens have suffered too. The quills are splintered, nibbled at the tip, their sharp points blunted by tiny teeth. You select the least damaged, running your fingers over the notches left behind. It is almost funny, almost, that the sum of your intellectual life can be undone by the smallest, hungriest creatures in the village. You wonder how many great ideas have vanished into the bellies of mice, how much wisdom has been turned to droppings and nests. You sit at your table and survey the carnage. Several sheets of notes are gone, chewed to ragged scraps. A careful diagram of the stars, rendered useless by a hole gnawed straight through the Pleiades. A page of sums, your best attempt yet at calculating yield from a hypothetical field, shredded and trailed across the floor like confetti. You gather up the fragments, piecing them together like a mourner at a wake, but the patterns are lost, the meaning scattered beyond recovery. There is no rage left in you for the mice. Anger is too costly, too exhausting, and besides, their hunger is only a reflection of your own. You live in the same world, driven by the same imperatives. Find food, find warmth, survive another night. Sometimes you imagine striking a bargain with them. Leave the ink, and you will ignore their midnight feasts. But you know such pacts are impossible. Mice do not listen. Mice do not reason. Mice, like cold and hunger, simply exist. You do what you can to reclaim your work. You use the salvageable scraps to light the fire, a meager flame, but enough to stave off the morning chill. You sweep up the droppings, scrub the ink stains from the table, and attempt to repair the worst of the damage. There is a lesson here, you suppose, about impermanence, about the futility of clinging to things in a world designed to erode and consume. But this wisdom brings little comfort. As you prepare to write, you find yourself hesitating. Each word, each diagram feels heavier now, burdened by the knowledge that it may not last the day. You choose your subjects with care, deciding what is truly worth the effort and what can be left to memory. The temptation is strong to give up entirely, to let the mice win, to stop struggling against inevitability. But you do not give in. You never have. You sharpen your quill, dip it into the newly strained ink, and begin again. The losses are not just physical. You feel them in your mind, in the slow erosion of ideas, in the gradual fading of certainty. Once, you believed that knowledge could outlast its creators, that the work of a single mind might endure beyond a lifetime. Now, you are not so sure. Oh, perhaps everything is doomed to be lost, gnawed away piece by piece, until nothing remains but fragments and stories. Even your own body seems to conspire with the mice. Your eyesight is weaker than it was last year. Your hands tremble more than you would like to admit, and every ache lingers longer than before. You write anyway, clinging to the habit as if it were a rope strung across a chasm. There is no safety here, only the stubborn belief that effort matters, even if the results are eaten, burned, or forgotten. Some days you envy those who do not care, who live without the burden of memory or ambition. The mice will not be remembered for what they destroyed, nor will you for what you created. But you cannot help yourself. You make your marks, knowing they will fade. By the time the village begins to stir, voices rising in the street, chickens scratching in the yard, you have reclaimed a little order from the chaos. The fire is lit, the ink is clean, and a new page is begun. You tell yourself it is enough. It has to be. There is no one coming to rescue your lost work, no reward for perseverance, no promise that tomorrow will be any different. You tuck your book back under its loose board, cast one last glance at the traps you have set, more hope than threat, and step into the day. The world outside is no less cruel than the one within. But for a moment, you take satisfaction in small victories. A clean desk, a few lines of fresh writing, the knowledge that for one more day You have survived both the mice and the mathematics. There are days when you imagine you might live and die in quiet obscurity, your work no more remarkable than the scratching of a chicken in the mud. But obscurity is rarely permitted to anyone, even slightly different from the herd, and you have always been a little too odd, a little too curious, a little too solitary for comfort. In this village, being noticed is almost always a prelude to trouble. You are never quite invisible, and that is never quite safe. Rumors cling to you as stubbornly as the mud to your shoes. They swirl around the well, gather at the market, ride the wind from house to house, until even you begin to wonder if there is truth to them. Some are almost flattering in their twisted way. You hear yourself called the wise man, the scribe, the one with the magic quill. But more often, the titles are barbs, the odd one, the mutterer, the one who stares at stars. The line between curiosity and heresy is perilously thin, and you walk it every day with worn out boots and a mouth full of caution. You learn, early and often, to pay attention to what is said in the spaces behind you, in voices that dip as you approach. Children point and giggle when you pass. Grown men fall silent mid conversation. Women tug their shawls closer, eyes flickering with suspicion or something sharper. If you look back too quickly, they turn away, pretending they were talking about the weather or the price of barley. But you know, it is never a single event that marks someone as other, but the slow accumulation of differences. You write when others sleep. You count when others guess. You ask questions when silence is safer. You patch your tunic with cloth of an odd color. You eat at odd hours. You keep to yourself and yet are seen everywhere. It does not take much. A phrase misunderstood, a diagram glimpsed, a word spoken at the wrong moment. Before you know it, you are the source of every odd occurrence and every small misfortune. When the crops fail, when the rain does not come, when the chickens stop laying, there are whispers that the man with numbers has angered the saints. When a child falls sick, someone remembers that you were seen muttering over a slate the night before. When the landlord raises the rent, the innkeeper's wife recalls the strange marks you made in your book, as if you might have hexed the whole village with a misplaced sum. Persecution in your world is rarely dramatic. It is the slow, grinding attrition of everyday life, the spit on your path, the stone thrown from the shadows, the loaf of bread that goes missing from your doorstep. It is the way people move aside when you approach, the way conversations dry up at your arrival, the way old friends become strangers overnight. The landlord watches you more closely. The priest pauses longer on the sins of pride and idle curiosity during his sermons. The boys who used to laugh at your lessons now scowl and mutter behind your back. Sometimes the malice turns practical. You find the door to your cottage blocked with stones, or your bucket missing from the well, or your ink poured out into the mud. Once, someone slipped a dead rat into your stores. A crude message, but unmistakable. You are not welcome. You are not trusted. You are, in their eyes, the bringer of bad luck, the root of discomfort, the explanation for everything they cannot explain. You keep your head down, your voice soft. You learn to answer every question with a question, to apologize for things you have not done. You laugh at their jokes even when you are the punchline. You do not defend yourself because there is no defense. The more you argue, the guiltier you seem. At times, the rumors take on a life of their own, twisting into legends. Some say you can summon storms, others that you can read the future in the movement of ants or the flight of crows. They invent stories of your origins, that you were found as a child beneath a blood red moon, or that you were apprenticed to a foreign sorcerer, or that you carry a curse from birth. These tales become more vivid with each telling, embroidered with details so outlandish you almost want to laugh. But you know better. Every lie contains a sliver of danger. Worst of all are the times when the authorities take notice. The priest comes to your door with polite questions about your reading, about your scribbling, about your interest in unnatural matters. He asks if you would be willing to explain your calculations to the bishop's man, should he come to town. He smiles as he says this, but his eyes are cold and clear. You smile in return and say that you only count what is already known, that your sums are as humble as your means. But you know that even humility can be suspicious. There are names for people like you: heretic, blasphemer, conjurer. There is a history of people who disappeared after such questions, whose books were burned in the square, whose names became cautionary tales for children who ask too much. You take precautions, of course. Your book is hidden deeper than before, your notes burned after reading. You speak less, listen more. When you must work, you do so at night, by the faintest of light, and you trust no one with your true thoughts. You are careful not to be seen at the wrong time, not to linger in the same place too long, not to attract the eye of anyone who matters. Still, you cannot help but see the pattern. The more the village suffers, the more it needs someone to blame, and you are always near at hand. It is a law as sure as any you ever learned. For every unexplained hardship, a scapegoat is required, and you are as good as any. Sometimes you are almost grateful that the villagers are too poor for pitchforks and torches, too weary for a proper witch hunt. The persecutions here are slow, smothering, a steady constriction of your world until there is nowhere left to stand. Yet, even as the rumors grow and the circle tightens, you cling to your purpose. You keep your records, guard your learning, trust in numbers as the last honest thing in a dishonest world. You know deep down that they will never forgive you for what you know, nor for what they think you know. Still, you cannot be what they want, nor what they fear. You can only be yourself, cautious, silent, patient. Sometimes, on sleepless nights, you wonder if you might leave, slip away to another town, vanish into the crowd, start again somewhere you are unknown. But you know that the rumors would follow, that the shape of suspicion is always the same. In every village, there must be someone to bear the blame. So you endure. You let the stories grow. You move through the village like a shadow, neither friend nor enemy, hoping only to survive another day, another week, another season. Perhaps in time, the rumors will fade, replaced by new scandals and fresh targets. But you know better than to trust in forgetfulness. In a world ruled by ignorance and fear, the numbers you keep are always counted against you. There comes a point in every life, perhaps, when the weight of disappointment settles so completely on your shoulders that it feels like another limb. You carry it with you everywhere, into the yard, the market, the unlit corners of your own mind. You cannot remember when you first picked it up. Was it the day your favorite student stopped coming to lessons? The morning your last friend disappeared, taking the only other book in the village with him? Or was it more gradual, a slow erosion, an endless wearing down by small losses and the dull grind of unchanging days? Today feels heavier than most. The sun, such as it is, barely makes an effort, smothered behind a sky like old pewter. The chill in your bones is not just from the weather, but from within, a coldness that even the rarest spark cannot dispel. There is nothing left to hope for, not even a change in the wind. You sit by your table, fingers idly tracing circles in the dust, and consider the mountain of futility you have managed to build out of your own ambition. You once believed, earnestly, foolishly, that you might change something here, that your sums and diagrams, your careful ledgers and lessons, might tilt the world a little towards sense and order. You believed you would leave a mark, that you would be remembered as more than a village eccentric, more than a warning whispered to children. Now, the truth is inescapable. You have become a cautionary tale, and not even an interesting one. Do not ask too many questions. Do not meddle with numbers. Do not linger in the company of the odd man with the ink stained hands. If you vanished tomorrow, the village would speak of you for a week, maybe two. Your absence would be another warning, another stone on the pile of collective suspicion. You look around at your possessions, such as they are. The battered book, patched and repatched, its pages more legend than text. A quill chewed by mice, an inkwell half empty and tainted, a handful of broken pots, a table carved with the memories of lost calculations. Everything is second hand, third hand, rescued from fire or abandonment. Nothing is truly yours except the thoughts in your head, and even those seem borrowed, faded from use. The world, you have realized, does not want what you offer. The children who come to your lessons do so under protest. The adults seek you out only when the sums refuse to work in their favor, when they need a scapegoat, or when they hope to blame the world's misfortunes on something more tangible than bad weather or poor soil. Your advice is ignored unless it fits their hopes, your warnings dismissed unless they confirm what everyone already suspects. Despair creeps in as a kind of numbness. You find yourself going through the motions, checking your stores, counting the wood for a fire you cannot afford to light, scratching notes you no longer believe will matter. The work continues, but the purpose has leached out. You catch yourself uttering into the middle distance, mind blank, hands idle. The mice make more noise in the quiet than you do. You remember a time when you used to write letters, careful, thoughtful letters, addressed to people who might understand. Most never received a reply. The last time you tried, you used your best parchment, your clearest hand, and waited for months. Nothing came back. You imagined the letter lost on the road, or burned for fuel, or used to wrap cheese at a distant market. It no longer matters. Everywhere, life goes on without you. The village stumbles through its rituals, the grinding of grain, the raising of livestock, the gossip at the well. You are not necessary. You are not even a curiosity, except when someone needs to blame a new rash, a bad egg, or a lost coin on the strange one. You hear the words, even when they are not spoken aloud. You see it in their eyes, in the way conversations stop when you enter a room. Your dreams are no kinder. Once, your sleep was filled with visions of great discoveries, of lines and shapes unfurling in perfect logic, of applause and recognition. Now, your dreams are filled with noise and confusion. You lose the thread of your own proofs. You walk endless corridors that lead nowhere. You wake tired, unrefreshed, the taste of disappointment bitter on your tongue. You wonder if the mathematicians, whose names you once revered, ever felt this way. Did Euclid ever despair at the uselessness of his postulates? Did Hypatia ever wish for a world where her knowledge meant something more than a death sentence? You have no way to know, but you suspect that even the greatest must have felt the chill of futility at times. The idea of giving up drifts through your mind like a leaf in a muddy stream. What would it look like? You could burn your book, let the mice have the rest, forget the numbers, join the village in its endless cycle of grudges and survival. You could become what they expect, a mute, laboring shape, eyes on the ground, hands busy with the work of simply not starving. It would be easier in some ways. It would be safer, but habit is stronger than hope. You pick up your quill, dip it in the tainted ink, and mark a line on the battered parchment. You have nothing new to say, no insight, no solution, only the movement of hand and pen, the empty ritual of persistence. It is not pride, exactly, more a refusal to disappear completely, a tiny act of rebellion against the weight pressing down on you. Outside, you hear laughter, raw, unkind. You do not bother to look. The sound is not for you. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere a child cries. Somewhere the church bell tolls another hour lost to darkness and cold. You count the chimes, not because you care what time it is, but because counting is what you do. You will keep counting until you can no longer remember why. In the end, you understand despair is not a single moment, but a slow, relentless erosion. It is the cumulative effect of small defeats, of never being wanted, never being understood, never belonging. It is the knowledge that you are alone in a room full of voices, that your words are echoes, your thoughts are smoke, and yet you remain for one more day, one more calculation, one more pointless hope. You tell yourself that if you cannot change the world, you can at least bear witness to its ugliness, its indifference, its failure to care for those who see too much. You are not proud. You are not angry. You are simply still here. You wake up to a gray, sullen morning and decide, quietly, without ceremony, that today you will not count. You will not add, subtract, divide, or tally. You will not measure the day in footsteps or the hour in church bells. You will not reach for your battered slate or run your fingers along the notches in your kitchen table. You will resist the urge, so deeply ingrained that it has become second nature, to assign numbers to every moment of your life. You decide this not out of hope, nor even out of rebellion, but from exhaustion. The numbers have become a burden, another form of hunger gnawing at your bones. For just one day, you want to exist outside of sums and reckoning, to move through the hours as others do, aimless, uncalculated, free from the tyranny of precision. You begin by ignoring the weight of your bread. Normally, you would slice it carefully, estimating just how many meals the loaf must last, how thin you can cut without risking hunger before the next baking day. Tomorrow, you break off a chunk at random, tearing the crust with your teeth, letting crumbs scatter wherever they will. It feels reckless, a small rebellion against the endless arithmetic of survival. You do not fetch water by measuring how much you need to save for later. You fill your bucket and drink until you are satisfied, pouring a little out on the doorstep for the chickens. You do not check the depth of the bucket when you are done. For a moment, you catch yourself wanting to guess how many buckets remain before the well runs dry, but you force your thoughts away. Not today. Chores fill the morning, collecting wood, sweeping the hearth, patching a torn sleeve. You do each task without counting. No tally of firewood, no inventory of how many pieces of clothing remain unpatched, no arithmetic about how many more cold nights you must endure before the season changes. You work slowly, awkwardly, deprived of your usual rhythm. It is a strange sensation, like walking with a limp or seeing through fog. The absence of numbers leaves you feeling unmoored, unsteady. When you step into the yard, you catch yourself counting chickens. You stop. You try to remember the last time you simply watched them move, pecking at the frozen ground, clucking in their aimless way. It is not easy. The urge to categorize, to sum and separate, is as natural as breathing. You wonder, for the first time, how the rest of the village manages to live like this, accepting each day as it comes, content to let uncertainty fill every empty space. The neighbors pass you with their usual wary glances, but today you do not calculate the odds that any one of them might stop to ask you for help or curse you under their breath. You do not keep a silent ledger of debts and favors, insults and kindnesses. You let their words wash over you, unmeasured, uninterpreted, for once just another part of the background noise. Midday arrives, and with it the temptation to sit and work. Your battered book calls to you from its hiding place. Your ink, strained of mouse hair, but still precious, sits waiting. But you resist. Instead, you take a walk to the edge of the fields, where the mud gives way to rough grass and the sky opens up above the stunted trees. You stand and let the wind find its way into your clothes, cold and sharp. You stare at the distant hills, refusing to estimate their distance or guess how many steps it would take to reach them. It is not easy, this business of uncalculated living. At times, your mind rebels, tries to fill the silence with numbers. When a flock of crows crosses the sky, you nearly count them, stopping yourself only at the last moment. When you pass the old graveyard, you resist the urge to tally the rows of stones, to update your private statistics of the village's losses. The absence of numbers is like the absence of light at night, everything formless, every outline blurred. As the afternoon drags on, you feel a different kind of exhaustion. The day moves more slowly, without the markers and milestones you are used to. Every action seems to last forever, every moment drawn out by your refusal to measure it. You begin to understand why your neighbors are so content with monotony, why they do not dream of more. Without numbers, the world is soft edged and endless, free of deadlines or expectations. There is comfort in it, but also a kind of despair. Hunger creeps in, as it always does, but you do not measure it. You do not try to ration what little food you have. Do not estimate how long the salt must last. You eat when you are hungry, stop when you are not. The meal is unsatisfying, but at least it is not a calculation. You spend the evening by the dying light, not working, not planning, not even thinking much. You let your mind wander, tracing shapes in the grain of the wood, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. The urge to calculate does not leave you, not entirely. It waits beneath the surface, like a muscle twitching after long use. Still, you hold out until nightfall. As you prepare for sleep, you catch yourself counting your breaths, an old habit for chasing away anxiety. You stop. You close your eyes and try to let the darkness come unmeasured, unsorted, without the comfort of knowing how long until dawn. In the end, a day without numbers is not a day of freedom, but a day of uncertainty. You realize that your habits, however wearying, however isolating, have kept you afloat. Without them, the world is shapeless and strange. When you finally drift off, it is with the silent promise that tomorrow you will return to your sums, your ledgers, your careful tallies. You are a mathematician not because you choose to be, but because it is the only way you know to make sense of a world that otherwise refuses to add up. And so, the experiment ends, not with revelation or relief, but with the dull certainty that the numbers will always call you back, whether you want them or not. There is a peculiar dread that comes with running out of paper. It creeps up on you slowly, a background anxiety that grows sharper with each torn corner and failed calculation. At first, it is only a nuisance. You ration yourself. You reuse scraps. You write in margins and between lines, careful to leave nothing blank. But soon, rationing turns to desperation, and every morning you check your dwindling supply as if by some miracle a new sheet might have appeared during the night. Of course, it never does. This morning, when you open your battered satchel and count, you find that you are down to your last page, a single, crumpled, ink stained rectangle, rough at the edges and soft in the center from too much handling. You turn it over in your hands, feeling its fragility. The parchment was not fine to begin with, and now it bears the scars of a dozen salvages. A water stain in one corner, a mouse bite at another, a patch where the ink has bled so badly that nothing will ever be read there again. You sit at your table and stare at it, unsure whether to use it at all. There is a temptation to save it, to keep it as a talisman against emptiness, a promise that you could still write, still work, still keep the numbers at bay. But you know yourself too well. The page will not last, just as nothing else lasts here. Mice will find it, or damp will curl its corners until it is useless. Best, then, to fill it while you can. You sharpen your last quill, scraping it against the stone with slow, deliberate strokes. The noise is sharp in the morning stillness. Your inkwell is almost dry, a skin of black clinging to the bottom, flecked with dust and mouse hair. You tilt it and coax out one more drop. Enough, perhaps, to write a few lines if you are careful, if you press lightly and hope the nib does not splinter. You dip, you tap, you steady your shaking hand. The question of what to write is almost paralyzing. In the past, you filled your pages without thinking. Sums, proofs, records of debts and rations, lists of deaths, tallies of firewood and sacks of barley, frantic notes about diseases or the village's slow, stubborn decline. You have written out prayers and curses, schedules and idle thoughts, half remembered dreams and failed experiments. Now, with a single page left, every mark feels momentous, every line a decision you cannot take back. You hesitate, then begin with what you know. You write your name, not that anyone will care, but as a small act of assertion, a statement that you were here and did this once. You write the date as best you can recall it, though you suspect you are a week or two behind. Time blurs at the edges, slipping past unmarked. You fill the first third of the page with numbers. The last sums you worked on, the solution to a problem that kept you awake for days, the unfinished proof that even now refuses to yield its secrets. Your handwriting is cramped and shaky, but you do not care. The act of writing is comfort enough, the shape of the numbers familiar beneath your fingers. You pause. What else deserves space on the last page? You consider writing advice for anyone who might find your notes. Warnings about the mice, the damp, the village's special talent for suspicion and resentment. You almost laugh. Who would read it? Who would listen? If another mathematician stumbles across your records, they will need no advice from you. If it is a priest or a landlord, they will burn it unread. You write instead a brief accounting of the year, the harvest that failed, the deaths that came in winter, the children who left for the city or for war, the sum of losses and departures that have left the village quieter, meaner, more haunted than before. You do not bother to soften the story. Let the last page speak plainly. The numbers are as stark as any tombstone. There is space for one more section, a patch in the corner, squeezed between lines and margin, too small for a new calculation. You write a list of names, those you have taught, those you have helped, those who have in small ways helped you survive. It is not a long list. You hesitate over Marta's name, remembering her questions, her mother's suspicions, the brief spark of curiosity that flared and then faded. You add it anyway. You stare at the remainder, wondering if there is anything else to say. You consider writing something beautiful, a poem, perhaps, or a sentence that sums up everything you have learned about numbers, or people, or the way the world quietly erases those who are not wanted. But the words do not come. You are tired. Beauty seems as fragile and useless as this last piece of parchment. You finish the page with a small, uneven sketch, a diagram, a proof, something no one but another mathematician would recognize. You do it out of habit, out of defiance, out of the need to leave something unfinished. You let your pen trail off at the end, as if there might be more, as if another page might follow. You sit back, hands trembling, and stare at the last page of your work, your life, your resistance to a world that has never cared for numbers or for you. You know that in time it will be lost, eaten by mice, destroyed by damp, forgotten by all. But for this moment, it exists. You have filled the last page, and in doing so, you have made your small stand against oblivion. There is a kind of relief in finishing. You tuck the page into your battered book, hiding it away as you have hidden everything else that matters. You straighten your table, sweep away the scraps and shavings, and let your hands rest, open and empty. Outside, the village continues as before, ignorant, suspicious, tired. The fire guttering in the hearth throws thin shadows on the walls. You close your eyes and listen to the silence, feeling a strange, cold pride. This, you think, is what it means to endure, not to be remembered, not to triumph, but to fill the last page, to finish the last sum, even when you know it will not matter. You rise from the table, and the day moves on, untroubled by your final work. Another day passes, indistinguishable from those before it. You wake as always, cold, sore, hungry, wrapped tight in your ragged blanket, listening for the sound of rain or rats or angry voices outside your door. The embers in your hearth are nothing but gray dust. Your fingers ache as you stretch, and you can feel the familiar fog of exhaustion settling behind your eyes. You have filled your last page, used your last bit of ink, solved every problem left to you, but the world carries on, unmoved and unchanged. The village, too, has learned nothing. The same gossip drifts from the well as women fetch water. The same muttered suspicions hang in the air as men pass in the lane, eyes downcast or narrowed, depending on whether you are close enough to hear them. The church bell tolls the hours, each one marked by routine and resignation. The dogs bark, the children fight, the hens pick at frozen ground. Hunger gnaws at everyone, and the only mathematics that matters is the daily calculus of survival. One more winter, one more season of poor crops, one more cold dawn with not enough to eat. You move through the morning tasks by rote, a walk to the well for water that tastes of iron and moss, a check for mice in your dwindling stores, a sweep of the floor to push back the mud and manure that always finds its way inside. You do not count the handful of beans left in your jar. You have sworn off tallying, for today at least, but the habit is hard to kill. Every action contains a hidden calculation: how much effort, how much risk, how much left before there is nothing more to lose. Your students, if you can still call them that, arrive in the afternoon, as they always do, shoving and jeering, faces red from cold and boredom. They do not ask about your book or notice the emptiness of your desk. The lesson is no different from any other: a few numbers scrawled in dirt with a stick, a half hearted attempt at division or measurement. Tommaso tries to trip Bert. Marta rolls her eyes. You recite your explanations, hear yourself echoing the same words as yesterday, last week, last year. No one listens. Nothing changes. Rumors still cling to you, as persistent as lice. You are blamed for a broken cart axle, for the death of a pig, for a fight that broke out between two families over a missing loaf of bread. The priest warns against dangerous knowledge from the pulpit, and eyes linger on you a little longer during Mass. Once you tried to reason with the villagers, to explain, to teach, to help them see the patterns and logic of their world. Now you have learned silence is safer. You nod and mumble your apologies, offer to help patch a roof or dig a ditch, and keep your calculations to yourself. Your book, your last page, your ink, all are hidden or gone. You have nothing left to write with, nothing left to write on. You keep your calculations in your head or let them slip away. It no longer matters. If the world cared for numbers, it would have shown it by now. If the world cared for you, you would have known by now. The same misery, the same suspicion, the same weary rituals continue without interruption. The seasons turn as they always have. Winter yields, slowly, grudgingly, to spring. The mud dries to dust. The fields turn green, but there is little celebration. The hunger of winter is replaced by the exhaustion of planting, and in every conversation circles back to the same worries: weather, pests, taxes, sickness. You see the cycle in the faces around you, a pattern so familiar it needs no calculation. Another year, another set of disappointments, another list of names gone from the rolls. Sometimes you think of leaving, but there is nowhere to go. Another village would be the same, a new set of rumors, a new priest with the same old sermons, a new group of children who do not want to learn. You have no kin, no money, nothing worth stealing. You are not so much trapped as rooted, grown into the soil of this place, as stubborn and overlooked as a weed in the churchyard. At night, you sit by the cold hearth and listen to the sounds of the village settling down. A distant argument, a lullaby, a dog barking at a shape in the dark. You think of your lost pages, your broken quills, the proofs and theorems and dreams that once filled your mind with hope. They are gone now, or at least you have learned to live without them. The urge to calculate is quieter, a dull ache rather than a desperate hunger. You wonder what will become of you when the inevitable end arrives. Will anyone mark your passing, note your absence, care that the village has lost its mad mathematician? Perhaps Marta will remember a lesson or two. Perhaps Tommaso will one day boast that he was taught by the village's wizard. More likely, you will fade as others have faded, your name, another empty space in the ledger, your legacy, a rumor no one can quite recall. Nothing has changed, and nothing will. The village survives, as it always does, through habit and suspicion, through the stubborn refusal to hope for better. You survive with it, not because you believe in miracles, but because you have never learned how to give up. You lie down on your bed of straw, listening to the creak of the rafters, the skittering of mice, the distant sound of rain on the roof. You close your eyes, counting your breaths not because you want to, but because you cannot help it. Numbers linger even now in the darkness and the quiet. Tomorrow will come, and it will be the same. You will rise, fetch water, mend what can be mended, teach what can be taught, endure what must be endured. The world will not notice, the world will not change, but for one more day you will persist, cold, hungry, unnoticed, unthanked, and in that persistence, perhaps, is your only victory.